Absolutely.
And so we are thrilled to have you join today, Aronde, and we want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, but then also share some of the great work that you are doing. And we've had quite a bit of interest in this topic, looking at diversifying the coaching industry, but then also looking at some of the ways that we can build some meaningful and very tangible actions to do so.
Sure.
So before we move forward, I'd love to have you just to share a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the work that you're doing, and just let the audience know more about you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Lawana, and thank you for having me. Good afternoon. Again, my name is Aronde Sekou Creighton. I am based in what is now known as Cobb County, Georgia, home of the 2021 World Series champions, but also what was originally land that belonged to the Muskogee and Creek indigenous people. And so I am joining you from my home office here in Cobb County. Behind me on the wall are black and white photos of historical and personal significance. And if I were in front of you, you would see a black man of brown skin tone. That's the color of cinnamon, with a shaved, not bald head, which is a very important distinction to have. I'm wearing clear rimmed glasses. I have a full beard that is black and colored silver and white at the chin due to the 17 and 20-year-old daughters who help bring those colors in a little bit further. If I were before you, I'm a millimeter over 6 feet tall. I am wearing a black pullover shirt that has a white and gold tribal pattern across the chest area. And so that is me in terms of how I show up. I am a cisgender heterosexual male is how I identify. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Diversity Officer for an organization known as Leadership Circle. And so in that capacity, I coach, I consult, and I also do work that is necessary to make sure that this field of coaching and leadership development is inclusive of all dominant and marginalized identities.
Excellent. And then as we think about this topic and we think about where we are, both as an industry, as well as some of the important work that seems to be garnering attention across even, governing bodies, accreditation bodies. You look at ICF as making statements. You look at ACTO, who has been at the forefront of really bringing this conversation to life in the coaching industry. And you look at IOC and many others, IPEC, you name it. And with that being the case, the intersection of the work that you're doing, as well as some of the aspirations that you have, I'd love for you to hear just your thoughts about this awakening and this period that we're in as a coaching industry as it relates to greater diversity.
Absolutely. And you know what I think is important, Lawana, is for those of us who identify as Black, Indigenous, or bodies of culture, it's not really an awakening. We've known that there have been deficiencies in our coaching field for some time. I've been in the coaching industry for about 15 years. I hold PCC certification with ICF. And I can think back to the numerous coaching programs that I went through and probably count on one hand and maybe less the number of instructors of color that I had during those programs. And so part of the reason that I think that that's so valuable and important is we need to bring our whole selves into the coaching conversation, both as coaches and as clients. And there's an article that I sent to you that's about 15 years old by Dr. Daryl Wing Su that I think is really, really instrumental and important in this space, because Dr. Su really talked about the importance of how microaggressions can show up in the helping professions. And at the time of his work, he was focusing heavily on counseling and therapy and psychotherapy, but I think it also folds over into coaching in this industry that we're all a part of. And just the times that attempting to have a coach that does not look like you. And if we're being blatantly honest, majority of the people in the coaching field up until this point have been white individuals, right? And it's a very different conversation that you and I would have with a white coach versus a coach that may look more like us. And that's an important distinction, especially when we consider that many times in that interaction, there are a series of microaggressions that can come across in that interaction between that coach and that client. And so, one of the things that came out in Dr. Sue's article was just the fact that even going back almost 50 years to about 1978, even the federal government recognized that those microaggressions and the racism that existed in that part of the field could be a contributing factor as to why Black, Latino, Asian populations are less likely to use those type of helping professions. And I think we can fast forward to 2021 and see the same thing within our own industry as we're looking at organizations that are looking to bring coaching into their work and to support their employees. Absolutely.
So when we think about the correlation of identity, the correlation of the needs that are happening right now all around us, we have coaches that have been invited into spaces that they have never gone before. And one thing I run into, and I've heard loud and clear from, we always have a bell curve pretty much in anything that we engage in, right? So you're going to have detractors, you're going to have champions, you're going to have those who are, really pushing things ahead. Mm-hmm. And quite honestly, most of the time we're really working towards that middle, right? The middle of that distribution or that bell curve. And so I have heard on the detractor end, because I like to listen to what detractors say, mm-hmm. to understand what some of the gaps may be, to understand perspective, and quite honestly, just to explore all of the different perspectives, right? And so some detractors say, well, I am a coach and I'm on the client's agenda and I'm simply there to hold space. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that, and I had someone call me, literally, they called me, but they were calling me basically to say why we shouldn't be focusing mm-hmm. on ethnicity, on a diverse population of coaches, why it's not needed, basically. Yeah. And, her thoughts were, I can hold space for any client because I'm on their agenda mm-hmm. and I'm simply there to help them navigate their own self-discovery. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. I listened to that and I know what I said in response. I'm interested to hear your thoughts about the relevance of having a diverse array and a global community of coaches that mirror our population. Yeah.
It's a great noticing and awareness that you're bringing up, Lawana. And so what I would first say in the context of the coach that you spoke to, as coaches, we all have to individually do our own work. Right. I often am concerned when I hear someone say they're a coach, but they do not have a coach. Because what work are you doing on yourself? The reality is, whether we identify as Black, Indigenous, white, cisgender, transgender, non-binary, whatever our identity is, if we have a heartbeat, we have bias, be that conscious or unconscious. So what's the work that you're doing within yourself, right? So, using that individual as an example, sometimes we've seen coaches and we've had these experiences where sometimes a coach will try to over-relate, as I like to frame it, to the individual. And so a white female coach being able to say, well, I know what discrimination is like because I'm a white female. It's not the same experience that you have as a Black woman, right? And so because of that, there needs to be an awareness of what is potentially going to get activated within me as a coach, as I'm coaching someone who has a different identity than what I possess. Okay. And so I think that's the first thing that we have to have some awareness around. The other side of it is the coaching relationship is so personal. And I need to be able to have full trust in that individual that I might be opening myself up to. And if I'm having to potentially spend time explaining what it's like to be Black, or for someone explaining what it's like to be trans, that can be an impediment to the growth and development that I am seeking out to have this coach. So even in my own case, my therapist and my coach are both Black men, and that was intentional on my part. And the way I always like to frame that is I was not going to pay a coach or a therapist for the first 5 sessions to inform and educate them on what it's like to be a Black man, right? That was not the direction that I chose to go. And so I think that, as you were talking about, I can hold space. We're all taught to do those things. Absolutely. Right. But there's also this level of interaction that people don't always like to acknowledge, that we refer to as aversive racism. Right. And that is when we have those who I don't see color. Right. Some of my best friends are Black. Typically, it shows up as those individuals who like to see themselves as the most liberal and all-encompassing, not realizing, right? Not realizing. This is why the education and programs like the ones that you offer are so important. The damage that does as a micro insult to the individuals that they're interacting with. So yes, I hear you. You can hold space, and there's more to this than just holding space. There is the understanding and sometimes the acceptance of my life experience being different from yours that needs to go into that relationship in order for both of us to feel like I'm okay. I'll share this quick short point before you ask your next question. When I first decided to go into therapy some years ago, I had a white female therapist. And as I engaged in therapy, there just was a disconnect, right? And there wasn't this understanding of, having the experience of being pulled over for something that I didn't think I should have been pulled over for, right? And then there's this, well, why didn't you just refuse to the officer to comply, right? If I'm working with a white coach or someone who doesn't have the cultural competence or sensitivity, there's not the understanding that is literally a survival instinct for me to go to 10 and 2 and just get into this place where I want to walk away from this interaction whole and alive, right? That's where that cultural competence and being able to engage with someone who looks more like me and understands what I'm dealing with in that time and the trauma that's associated with it becomes so valuable.
Absolutely. And thank you for sharing that. And, I really believe in having 360-degree conversations, right? And that was my point about I seek out the detractors and to understand what is your perspective and how can we better add value in this space, right? And so the next piece, right? Because we always want to go deeper, right? We're coaches.
Yeah.
And so that first piece is, I'm a coach. I can coach anyone because I'm on their agenda. All right. So you help us walk through some of that. Then the next piece is, well, wait a minute. Are you saying that if I'm not a member of the LGBTQIA+ community, I can't coach someone who's a member of that community? Or if I'm not neurodiverse, I can't coach someone that's a member of the neurodiverse community? Of course, we're not saying that.
Right.
What we're talking about is that deeper work.
Yeah.
And that's the question.
Yeah.
Are you willing to do the work? Because I've said it, and I know I catch it for saying it, but I'm going to continue to say it. So many people are slapping diversity and inclusion in front of their coaching titles right now,
right,
because it's in demand.
Yeah.
I get it. My question to you is, are you willing to do the work?
Absolutely.
It takes to not just hold the space, because here's another place for us to discuss, which is around, well, I'll say that for the next question. So let's just stop at this piece around, are you saying that I have to be a member of a certain demographic or community in order to effectively coach that members from that community?
Yeah, so let me give the short answer is no, that is not what I'm saying. And I think there's an important step even before the question that you got to, and that's choice. Our coaching field tends to be very homogenous right now. And it's important to give people choice in terms of what their coach looks like, as opposed to here is a slate of 5 white men, 5 white women, and you are a Latina first generation into North America, right? Whereas if I can give a full slate, and this is one of the reasons that I do truly appreciate and love the coaching field, because guess what? The type of client that's going to work for me may not be the exact type of client that's going to work for you, Lawana, but that's what the relationship becomes so powerful, because I can simply say, you know what? the style that you might want somebody like a Lawana Harris, right? You might want somebody like, I just see my brother Steve Galloway just came back on, right? So I can begin to give this person options and choice. That's not what most Black, Indigenous, and bodies of culture have had when it comes to coaching services. They haven't had that choice, right? And that's where the diversity is important, because if we're being honest, what, 2 to 4% of the coaching field falls outside, is non-white, right? I mean, that's a low percentage. It's a low percentage. And so what someone who is an Asian American first generation goes through climbing the ladder in the corporate setting, right? It's so much easier when I can pair them up with one of my Asian American friends who understands what they went through, because maybe part of their experience was, I didn't know my chief HR officer was going to be Asian. I expected you to be in head of engineering, right? Again, the microaggressions, the micro insults. So I think the choice part is one of the important aspects that we have to tap into to make sure that we're expanding this coaching field so it does look more like society in general with the diversity. So I can pick and choose and say, looks like me, may have some similar experience. I coach a number of clients who have marginalized identity in an area that I have dominant, right? This is where what you were saying about doing the work becomes important, where I've got to have people that I'm tapping into, that I've got to be able to do my own work in this space. And what is it that I'm not aware of when it comes to orientation? What is it I'm not aware of when it comes to gender expression? What is it I'm not aware of in this neurodiversity? You know, part of the challenge as well as the opportunity in this justice and equity work that we do is it seems like there's more identities coming to the table that we hadn't really been thinking about, right? 2-3 years ago, on the wide scale, people weren't as conversant about neurodiversity as they are now, right? People weren't as conversive about ableism as they are now, right? We didn't have some of the language to really understand transgender and the difference between gender identity and gender expression and sexual orientation and biological sex that we do now, right? So that's why we have to continually do our own work in that space to show up the way that that client needs us to show up, right? And also to be open to say, if I say something, do something, I know you're the client, call me out on it, right? Educate me. But many times, because of the way that we are trained as coaches and trained in our educational system in a very Western philosophy that I am the expert, I know all, we don't want to subject ourselves to, you're paying me as a client, but at the same time, there's something that I'm learning from you, right? And I think that that's also part of the mentality and shift and change that we need to have in the coaching field.
Absolutely. And thank you for that, because where I want to go next is around that educate, please. And before I go there, though, a couple things. When we take this and we layer it on with existing competencies and expectations, if you boil it down to a very pragmatic level, we're not talking about something that's too far off from what we already do on some level. Right. Because you mentioned style. So we already have exploratory discussions, we have discovery, and we try to see, right? Some people call it chemistry discussions. So we already know that there is an existing need to have some level of a match, right? Right. So we're not even debating that. Everyone across the industry agrees that there needs to be a certain level of match to have a mutually beneficial engagement. Well, of course, with us focusing on the client the most. So if we take just that, which is the common ground we have, all we're saying is, here's a layer that hasn't been added and given attention before. That's right. That can take us to a level of depth and understanding and impact. And we're here simply to introduce a way to do that. Exactly. That's it. That's it. And it's a layer, and there's reasons why this layer hasn't been added, right? And that's when we can get into the conversations around the systemic impact, the institutional and even structural impact, coach training organizations, governing bodies, accreditation, the whole gamut. Now can really have a real conversation around why it hasn't been a layer.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing is now that it's garnering this attention,
mm-hmm.
we have some solutions out there.
That's right.
So let's get after it, right? Let's get after it in service of the client.
Yeah.
So that piece, I love to tie it back to the competencies,
mm-hmm.
because there are some people, again, detractors, I've listened, who say they feel, sometimes we push diversity just for diversity's sake.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the case. We're looking at this in service to the client. Right. And now the next piece I wanted to touch on is, and I know we're going to transition here in a few minutes, but mm-hmm. I wanted to touch on that piece of educate.
Yeah.
And education. Mm-hmm. And the need to educate. So here's the thing. I understand that in a coaching relationship, our job is not to step in and interject. Mm-hmm. So that's the disclaimer statement for all of the competency police that'll be out there right. with what I'm about to say. However, I have found that when we're having conversations that are deeply embedded in matters of DEI and J, we'll add justice to that, mm-hmm. there are opportunities and a need for mm-hmm. spot education. Mm-hmm. Meaning, you may have a client who themselves, based on where they are in the journey, they don't see the water they swim in. That mm-hmm. water could be privilege, that water could be homophobia, mm-hmm. that water could be any other ism, fill in the blank. Right. And because there's not that base level of awareness and understanding, there's an opportunity as a coach not to go into a long dissertation of the last 400 years of American history or whatever history, or for me, I really got into it when I was supporting some clients through the Palestinian and Israeli conflict earlier this year. Yeah. But that said, there are some times for some spot education. And I know that that's not necessarily aligned with traditional thinking yeah. when it comes to coaching. Yeah. Any thoughts on those opportunities for potential spot education in these areas when there's a pure lack of awareness and understanding to even be able to have a conversation around these issues?
Yeah, that's a beautiful point, Luana. And if I'm being honest, I've never thought about it in that context of the spot education with the coaching client right then, right? What I know that I have done and experienced is to be able to post session when I can take off that coach hat and perhaps put on more of that advisor hat or other capacities consultant that we might operate in, to be able to create the dialogue to say, Luana, I want to follow up with you on something that came up in the coaching session. Do you have a few minutes? Right. And engaging in that truly from the perspective of wanting to help. Right. So one of my personal mantras, and I adopted this a little bit from Luvvie Ajayi and some of the work that she's done, is, I ask myself 3 questions. Do I believe what I'm about to say? Is what I'm going to say going to help or hurt? And if I'm still in hurt mode, because I got feelings, I could be in my feelings just like anybody else, right? Then I need to keep processing it. I need to keep meditating on it, right? And if I get to the place where it's going to help, can I say it to them in love? And so for me, that's my filter, right? Where I can do that to help the client grow. And I think one of the things that can be very valuable in that is when we are able to go through that process of use of self in that example, in that environment, right? And so for me, one of the journeys that I've been on in this justice and equity space has been around not getting so caught up in the fact that I'm Black, I know all things about diversity, but then also not recognizing that as a man in a patriarchal country and society, that I've been able to benefit from some things on that side, right? And then also understanding how much I have to continue to learn and grow as we look at orientation and gender identity, right? And so I'm very quick to use that as an example to say, hey, this is the place that I've had to grow. And in growing, this is what I've come to learn. So it allows there to be a connection to say, hey, I'm really coming at a place of wanting to help you continue to develop, because that was one of the original reasons that you contracted with me as a coach, because of the developmental journey that you were on.
Absolutely. And I thank you for that, because those are 2 different ways We as coaches, you know what? Some of this is honestly, most of this is uncharted territory for a lot of coaches.
Absolutely.
So whether it's taking the approach you mentioned of seeking to engage after the coaching session to look at opportunities for some education around some of the needs that they have, again, the client has brought to the coaching conversation, or some of the research that I'm doing around SPOT education integrated in the coaching conversation.
Absolutely.
So there's multiple theories out there and ways to approach it. The bottom line is we can do this with a level of intentionality, and we thank you for what you're doing. We thank you for the work you're doing. And before you go, I really wanted to see, there may be some people who are looking for opportunities based on their current client base to engage across a diverse array of coaching clients, but then also just to have these types of conversations. Would you like to say anything, or could you say something about the Coaching for Everyone?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know that's my heart. For those who aren't familiar with Coaching for Everyone, everything that LaWanna and I are talking about here in terms of increasing the number of Black, Indigenous, and bodies of culture in the coaching industry, as well as getting those services to the people that can benefit from it. Right. That's the other important part, is we have a lot of people who are under-resourced who can't afford coaching. And that's what Coaching for Everyone is really focusing on. And so I have the privilege of being on the board of the organization. We've created relationships right now with both CTI and IPEC, where we have coaching fellowships. And what we do on our end is we raise funds to be able to support those individuals who would not normally have access to coaching services and training to get trained. And in exchange for that, they are committing to spending some of their coaching hours and time in those under-resourced communities. And so, in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm relaunching my fundraising page. I'll tell a little bit of a secret here, LaWanna. I hit 50 on Saturday. So what I'm asking people to do is, in honor of that, to make a donation to Coaching for Everyone, so that we can get more and more people coached that look like us, that can support those who need that type of work out there.
Excellent. And congratulations. Welcome to the 50 Club.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Coming up behind me. I'm ahead of you. I'm grandma.
All right. It's all good. It's all love.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. Most importantly, thank you for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
We look forward to continuing to collaborate with you in your journey, and look forward to our paths crossing again in the future. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Enjoy the weekend, everyone.
Absolutely. All right. So as we continue for today, I just wanted to open it up first just to see any questions, reflections that we have here as a group. And how do we take some of the work and some of those pearls of wisdom that Aronde just shared with us? How do we take it forward and translate it into meaningful action? I'll open up to the group. Thoughts, reflections, questions. You're on mute.
Hi, I'm Femi Agana. This is my first time here, and I just wanted to thank you. I was so engaged and educated by what I just heard. I'm not a working coach. I did do coaching for transformation in 2017, but I did it for myself. I've just embarked on a second course because I don't feel, fully competent. And they recently opened a group for people of color within that coaching course, because of course, I have the same experiences as everyone else, where there's like one or two people of color and there's only one actual coach, working in the program. So I was so happy to hear about what you were doing, and I'm anxious and eager to share all this information with the people in the new group that's just opened the forum. And I wanted to ask you, is it okay to just invite people? How do I invite the people, my classmates, to this forum?
Absolutely. You can just share the link to the LinkedIn group. They can join there. They can send I'll just put this in the chat now. They can send an email directly to me to be added to the distribution list for future events. This is open information for the entire coaching community. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much. I'm so happy. I can't tell you how happy, because I've, been, going through my mind, even though I've just started the second course, am I going to do this? This is so needed. And, to find someone exactly on the same page so quickly, I'm just like over the moon. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining, and thank you for spreading the word, because the more of us that we can bring together in our collective thinking, that's the whole point, is to create a global community where we actually can bring some rigor to our approach to coaching in this space, but then also bring some consistency and some much needed support as we engage in supporting our clients in this area. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.